you, Robert. I think I ought to probably, seeing as this is an otology course, I probably ought to change the title to the introduction of a closed technique on the ship's toilet. I'm afraid to tell you it was a failure. we got too high a residual disease rate. But anyway, as you know, Captain Bligh was a chap whose crew mutineered, and he was actually a very nice chap. He was too soft on his crew, and when they got to the Pacific, they had too good a time, and they decided to desert him. Whereas Captain Cook, who kept all his crew, he came up from the lower deck of the ship, and when the Master-at-Arms wasn't whipping the offending member of crew hard enough, he made sure that the Master-at-Arms also had 12 lashes. So, you know, there was no messing about on Captain Cook's boat. So it just shows you how history changes. Well, I fell off the end of my stapedectomy piston a couple of years ago, and it was time to do something else. So the plan was to retire and have a look round and see what was see some of those islands that were in all the pictures, really, and meet some of the people in the front row. Really, you can see Colin, my friend, and me got inserted in the back row. Have you got the laser pointer there? Yeah. Did I? Oh yeah. I haven't got it. Yeah. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Oh, excellent. Great. We'll just go back one. That's it. So, what sailing? So you need a little bit of sailing experience, and my sailing experience consisted of my wife Bridget is all right on when the sea is calm, so she used to allow me and a few friends to go around the Irish Sea, where it was cold and unpleasant, and we had a week a year of men behaving badly. So we went from one whiskey-sodden pub to another, really, and that was about it, really. And once a year we used to go down and race in the NHS regatta, where the main problem was John Oates, who was in another boat, who just kept carving us up and giving everybody a hard time. So when you select your crew for an expedition like this, you need somebody reliable. And the fellow who we had was Colin, who I'd met him 3 years previously. He had the wife from hell, and he was divorced, and he appeared with my two old school friends, who were unreliable as usual. And Colin was delightful, charming, practical, calm, everything you could want for a mate who came round all the way down to New Zealand. And the idea was to have Colin came all the way, and various people rolled up along the route, including this fellow, who we had a clapped-out old outboard. It was only about 6 horsepower, and John managed to sort of tune it up like a Maserati, and he was scaring this poor German lady who came with us as well. She was a big improvement to cuisine. So, if you're going to pick a boat for a trip like this, you need to think about one or two things. The first is your budget. We hadn't got that much money, so I bought an old boat. It was built in 1976. But in 1976, they were terribly worried about this thing called osmosis, which gets into the fibres of the fiberglass. And they built it very thick, so it was a bit of a heavy boat. But that's ideal, really, because a heavy boat looks after you in a storm. And if you have a keel that is relatively long, that gives you stability. You can't turn very easily when you're going backwards, but you have stability going forwards, and you have stability when you're going against the wind. And also, if the rudder is protected with a thing called a skeg, that's also pretty good if you hit anything. And to make it go a bit faster, you can get a propeller that feathers it. In other words, the blades from going like that when you're sailing, they go like that, so that gives you a little bit more speed. So you do want to have reasonable speed. You don't want to be at sea forever. So it doesn't matter that you don't go terribly fast, but about 6 knots is a good, comfortable speed. But the most important thing is that everybody is comfortable on the boat. It's not got a bad motion, and that you can live on it okay. So, where do you go? How do you get there? Well, here's the sort of map of the wind, and the idea is that you have the wind going behind you. In other words, there's this phrase, "Gentlemen don't go to windward," and this is what used to be the old trade triangle. Remember the ships that used to come out from the UK, and they used to bring guns all the way down here to the slave traders, and then they had this terrible trade where they took the slaves off. Thought 30% of them died. They took them to the Caribbean, and then they took spice up here, picked up some tobacco, and went back there. And all the time they had the wind behind them, so it was really easy. So it was just a big circle. So that's what we did really. We took off from here. The only bit that sometimes worries you is going across the Bay of Biscay, because that's unpredictable. But after that, it's the wind comes behind you, and so do the currents all the way down the Moroccan coast to the Canary Islands, and then the Cape Verde Islands, then across the Atlantic. And then you get into the Pacific, where it's almost the same. You go through the Panama Canal, and you have a while motoring through this bit, which is called the Intratropical Convergence Zone, which is commonly known as the doldrums. You go through that, and then you pick up these trade winds again, which take you across to French Polynesia, to the Cook Islands, to Tonga and Fiji, and finally down to New Zealand. So, one or two other little considerations that you have to think about. You're going to have all your own power, really, all the way across. And there are various ways of doing it. Our boat was too small to have a big, noisy generator. So we had these things called solar panels. We had solar panels on the roof, and we also had a propeller that we could drop in the water, which generated about 5 amps. So we were always self-sufficient for power, and even at night with chart plotters on, navigation lights on, everything else on, we were generating more power than we were using. And the other thing is to set yourself up, because you never know who's going to be ill or who's going to be incapacitated. So you set it up so that you can really sail the boat with just one person if you need to, and that's very handy. So we have all the controls, the radio, the chart plotter, everything available, so you can just do it yourself if you really need to. Now, water's a bit of a consideration. You have to be a bit careful about water. We had a 100-gallon tank, and we were 5 people for 21 days. Some places, like this one, here we are in the river in Ecuador, you can't get water on tap. You have to get it by boat, and this guy Pedro knew exactly how much water to put on his boat. He knew his limits. So with the water, you need to be a little bit careful. So what we did was we had one tap here, which was salt water, and one tap here for fresh water, and you switched off the electric pump. You washed all your dishes. What you said, especially in the tropics, drink as much as you like. Drink, in fact, keep drinking, because you didn't want anyone getting dehydrated. But all the washing up was done with the salt water. And then when you wanted to have a shower, we conducted an experiment where you go forwards on the foredeck, and you put a bucket down, and you just get a couple of buckets of salt water, and you could have salt water shampoo. And interestingly, because we only washed about once every 3 days, we thought we didn't smell as much, but we're not sure, because there were no independent witnesses. Now, you remember, if you were in the army, you're told by your sergeant major, treat your rifle like a mistress, not badly like your wife. You're going to depend on it. Well, exactly the same applies to your engine at sea. You've really got to inspect it on a regular basis, because you find things that you won't. Belts can go, pipes, bits of pipe can be falling off. You can get stuff in the water trap you weren't expecting. You need to be changing your oil filters and everything else regularly. And if you do that, then you're less likely to get trouble. And our engine was a very old engine. It was old Mercedes, which was quite good because this is a sort of engine that's in taxis all over the world. So lots of boats got stuck because they didn't have spare parts. Especially in the Pacific, there's no Chandlers or anything like that. But usually, if you needed a part for this one, there was some old garage mechanic round the back who'd have something that would work. And as regards communications, there's a bit of a debate. It's a bit like closed versus open techniques between an old steam-powered radio, this thing, called a single sideband radio, where you bounce the signal from the backstay of the mast right off the ionosphere, and it can spread. You can get signals for 500 miles, sometimes further at night. And nowadays there's a system where you can get emails on that, and of course you can get condensed weather information on that as well, and it's free. And the other advantage is you can you say at 8 in the morning we're going to talk to everybody on this route, and there are quite a few other people around, and you can have a chat about how's it going and what's the weather like with you and have you got problems, and it's very nice to chat. So in some ways it's rather better than a satellite phone where it's very expensive to get the data. But ultimately, if you have an emergency where you wanted to talk to, say, Falmouth, you can actually just phone them up on a satellite phone, where you have to do it via the radio station with the single sideband. Now, food you have to think about a little bit. When you bring vegetables on board, they all have to be scrubbed and in a dilute solution of bleach, because you're worried about termites and all this sort of thing, and you get rid of all the cardboard and all the packaging, and store everything really dry. Dry it out in the sun. Store store potatoes and things in a dry, cool place. The meat preserves better if you have what you do is you go down to the butcher and you buy this huge hunk of steak that you can have in little bits, and it's not individual steaks. It's just a huge piece, and then you vacuum pack it and put it in we didn't have a freezer, you just had a fridge with a fairly cold bit to it. But that lasted a good 3 weeks, so it was quite good. And then you can supplement. Well, we learned how to bake bread. That was good fun. The secret of baking bread I've discovered, well, most of it is rubbish instructions. The only thing you have to do is to put the yeast and the sugar and the warm water together, and if it starts bubbling, you know the yeast is okay, and all the rest of it is finer details, and the bread will be okay. And we'd also tail a couple of lines, which have to be strong lines, because you get these. This is a dorado, or mahi-mahi as they're called, and you get these huge predator fish, big Atlantic mackerel and tuna, and they can move at 40 miles an hour. And if you stop the boat when you get them on, they're terrible. They go under the keel, everywhere, wriggle free. So in the end, we discovered the best way was to just keep going and tire the fish out just by keep going. And eventually, you just reel him in, and you could have sushi for lunch, and then fried fish afterwards, and it really was good. Really fresh fish. So that made a really nice adjunct to the diet. And then we wanted the majority of sailing you do is in fairly light winds rather than strong winds. Or the light winds are a bit of a problem because you want to go a bit faster. This was a heavy boat, so in addition to the propeller we got this sail. I don't know if it's called a parasail. It's all very technical, and the idea is that there's this Bernoulli principle where if the wind goes faster on the front of the sail than it does on the back of the sail, you get lift. So the idea is it goes through this little slot, and there's this second vane, and it pushes the air round there to produce the lift. And it's a very nice sail. You can just sail along with the wind behind you and have it up all day. but we decided in the end we didn't use it at night because something would always happen and there'd be a big panic and people on the deck with torches at night and things going wrong. So we just used to settle down with our conventional rig at night. The other thing as a doctor you have to think about is medical emergencies, because you're responsible for the rest of the crew. So I had a big kit with all the medical kit we could think of, morphine, you know, this, that, the other, splints, blah, blah, blah. And the one thing I didn't think about was what would be the situation if the victim was me. So what happened? I'd dislocated my shoulder previously skiing and thought it was okay again. And in the middle of the Atlantic, it was very calm. And we thought, well, we'll go for a swim. And when you dive, your arm is in that position, which is the dislocation position for the arm. So I dived in, and the shoulder dislocated. So got back on board with a bit of difficulty, and then thought, well, we're going to have to get this lot to put the shoulder back. So it's all right. So I managed, this arm was dislocated, so I got them to get the kit out and everything. I put a Venflon into the other arm, and John says it was too big a dose, but I got them to give me 20 milligrams of morphine. It worked quite well. It was good. And so Joe, my brother, put his knee. He sat up there and he put his knee underneath the armpit. And Colin pulled on the third attempt. He managed to get the shoulder in. So Joe, my brother, is a bit of an extrovert, and he spent an entire evening when we got to he's not medical, he's a finance person. Yeah, he spent the entire evening getting free drinks off everybody, giving them instructions into how to put a dislocated shoulder back at sea. Anyway, there we are. So we went down across the Bay of Biscay, and the first thing you come across when you're going across Biscay are these big pilot whales and minke whales, and they're interesting whales. They just surface and then go down. They carry on in a straight line. They don't avoid you. They just, if you're in their path, that's just too bad, you know. And Vincent, our friend, he got a hell of a shot when we were just going along, and 10 yards behind him when he was on watch, this blinking thing just, you know, comes up, surfaces and blows off. So you never quite know with whales. A collision with a whale is more likely than a collision with a container. And then you get down to Africa, and here is the port of Essaouira, which is in Morocco, which used to be a big slave port, but now is a huge fishing port. And you can see these boats these guys go out in open boats, and they're there for a week, 2 weeks. They're sometimes resupplied, but you meet them in the middle of the sea, and they just ask you, can we have a can of Coke or some water or whatever, you know. They're not pirates, they're just fishermen who have been left by their mates with very little in the way of supplies. So they have a pretty hard life. And then finally you get down in the autumn to the Canaries, and here we are in this port, a big port of Las Palmas, where they have a fantastic tradition of teaching the youngsters how to sail. And you can see these huge fleets of optimists with, you know, 7 or 8-year-old kids on board. And that's the way to do it, really. Just get a youngster on a boat at a very early age, make him the skipper, and they just take to sailing like a duck to water. So you're sitting around in the Canaries, drinking gin and tonics at night, and you put up this tropical canvas awning, and you spend your time. You make friends. You're on an anchorage with a lot of international people, so that's good fun. You make a lot of friends, and everybody's trying to improve their boat and get it ready for the Atlantic. And it's great. It's great fun. We spent about a month there. We learned how to dive there. That was good. We got our PADI certificates, and that was very useful for later on. And we joined this thing called the Atlantic Rally for Cruisers, where you you have a bit of support as you go across the Atlantic. It's just like one big party, really. They give you some instructions as to what the boat needs, and they inspect your boat, make sure it's okay. They arrange a big party before you go, which was good fun. All the crew dancing away there, and then they say the start isn't a race, but everybody races for position. And we actually came out of about 60 boats. We came fourth across the line. So I said, well, sorry guys, it's a slow boat. That's as good as it gets. So it deteriorated from there. And then we did the route where you stop in these islands called the Cape Verde Islands, which are basically Portuguese. They're off the African coast, mainly African people there. Suddenly the sea changes from this dark blue to azure, lovely azure blue. It's a lovely place to visit, super stop. And again, when we kicked off from there was a bit of a racing start, and there was a lot of fun. But eventually you get into the Atlantic, and you have these enormous great rollers. It's a bit like going up these waves. It's a bit like going up. It's not chop like you get in the Channel or somewhere like that, where you bang, bang, bang. You just go up on a great big conveyor belt and come down again. But for the first 2 days at sea, everybody feels a bit rough. They can't sleep right. Everything, it's a bit of an endurance test. But then people settle down, seasickness eases, people start sleeping okay, they get into a routine, and the whole boat just chills down, and everything's fine. And usually about 6 o'clock in the evening, you have your dinner. In the tropics, it gets dark at 7 o'clock on the dot regularly. So you have the dinner, watch the sun go down, and then we had a little laptop computer with some videos, and we had the cockpit cinema in the evening. And one of the girls was related to her brother's a member of Elbow, and told Benedict Cumberbatch that we were watching Sherlock Holmes, and we got a special message from Benedict Cumberbatch by email saying how delighted he was. I think if he'd known what a bunch of scruffs we were, he wouldn't have bothered. But there we are. So for this ARC, one of the things that's useful is your wife and family can keep an eye on you, because they have this little transmitter, so they can see where you are. And that's Kika approaching the Caribbean, and you then roll up on the Caribbean, and we were okay. We got there at night, but some of our friends had a bit of a rougher passage. This is a mate called Clive Sparks, who John and Robert know. He bought his wife insisted on bringing the cats. What a disaster! And they had a very tough time, despite the fact that his daughter and son-in-law were yacht masters, and they were absolutely exhausted when they arrived. But everyone gets a glass of rum punch. There's a party at the other end, and further parties, and it's all great fun. But after that, I think you really, you can carry on with this organisation right around the world. But you don't. You just meet the people who are sailing around with you. You don't meet the local people, which is half the fun of going around. So we carried on. You have to devise new engineering solutions to problems, and we had the anode come off one of the thrusters. So there we are. We sent the scuba diving team down with the spanner to fix it. So you just work out what you're going to do about problems, and then you carry on around the Caribbean. And we came down from St. Lucia all the way down to Grenada, and then across to the Dutch ABC Islands. You avoid Venezuela. Venezuela is what Colombia used to be. It's full of pirates. Even the Coast Guard are engaged in piracy, so it's seriously bad news. So you stay off the Venezuela. But Colombia has changed hugely. Colombia is an absolutely delightful place, wonderful people, and we got to a place called Santa Marta to start with, which is near to Cartagena, and we had an absolutely lovely time there. And we went inland from there to a place called Mindo in the hills. And we had a wonderful day where we climbed up a mountain where there was just a little foot track where you spent about 2.5 hours climbing up. There was no road there. Really difficult climbing. Both Colin and me were exhausted by the time we got there. And we met old Miguel at the top of the mountain, who had his farm up there. No tractor, just had a few fruit trees, grew a few coffee plants, had a few animals around his place. Really scratched a living on the edge of nowhere. He managed to get a fridge, and we said, "How the hell did you get that up here?" And they used 2 poles, strapped it to the 2 poles, and all his 4 sons brought it up on their backs. Extraordinary, but it was a real privilege to meet him. He was one of the happiest men I've ever met in my life, and he just didn't have. He had, virtually no two beans to run together. Just quite extraordinary. And then you go through the Panama Canal, which, as you know, was the first chapter try was a fellow called de Lesseps he was a Frenchman who'd built the Suez Canal, and they thought it was going to be a piece of cake because the Suez Canal, you just had to drive a bit through a couple of bits of sand and you got there really. But the Panama Canal, well, there were mosquitoes there for a start, and there was a big hill to go through. So de Lesseps thought, well, we'll just do the same as we did for the, and there was a lot of investment in it in France. So people thought this is a good thing, and unfortunately they had problems A with the engineering and B with malaria because they didn't understand malaria at the time, and the malaria hospital was built on stilts, and the stilts were built on stagnant fresh water, an ideal breeding ground for mosquitoes. So, the whole thing collapsed, and it's very sad because there's a huge French graveyard there of all the people who died. So the people who took it over were the Americans, and they, number one, they did a controlled trial where they put some people in a tent with DDT sprayed on the walls, and another in the tent with no DDT. The ones in the tent with no DDT died, and the other ones survived. So they worked that one up, and they also worked out that if you sprayed the fresh water with oil, it prevented the mosquitoes from breeding. So they got on top of that, and then they also worked out that you needed locks to deal with the engineering challenge, and they got there in the end. So you go with a pilot, and he takes you through because you're in with this huge amount of shipping, and they don't want any cock-ups really. And you lock in either attached to a tug or sometimes to the sidewall, and the forces of water coming in are just enormous. So you have to have your engine on full blast going forwards with the wheel steering, with the pilot telling you exactly where you need to go. So it's quite an interesting business, and they have these line handlers, these guys who throw you lines, and you're in the middle of the thing, and these guys can throw lines enormous distances across the canal, and this monkey fist line just arrives like a rocket on your deck, absolute accuracy, and you pull it in and get through. So that takes about a day and a half, and then you arrive on the other side in the Pacific, and the first thing you notice are these magnificent pelicans who are all over the place. And they're diving for fish, extraordinary birds. And the other birds that crop up are these pterodactyl-like birds called frigate birds. They look like something out of prehistoric life, really, but they're very effective. They steal fish off other birds. So at least 60% of their food comes that way. And then we went down along the coast on the other side to Ecuador, where diesel fuel is $1 a gallon, and there's a very socialist president who believes in making everything cheap for ordinary people, which is quite good because he upset the ruling sort of Spanish establishment really, and looked after people at the bottom end. But it's really good. It's really interesting being there. You get into this little bay called Bahia de Caraques, the places where not many people go. The chart plotter's wrong. So you look at the chart plotter and you're going in the middle of a channel and you're on dry land, so you can't rely on the electronics. And this channel isn't buoyed, so the pilot comes out to you, and even with the pilot we managed to run aground, so it was fairly unreliable. But it was a great place to go. Absolutely lovely people. Had a wonderful time there. And then from there, you go out to about an 8 days passage out to the Galapagos Islands, where the thing that really strikes you is that the wildlife there doesn't see man as a predator, so they come straight up to you. So if when you come ashore, you want a seat, really. You're tired, and there's a blinking sea lion there saying, "Bugger off!" I've got this seat. And you see the pelicans there waiting for a bit of fish, and then there are all these iguanas around, and quite extraordinary. But of course, the important thing about the Galapagos Islands, which they didn't make much of a deal about, was, as you remember, Darwin had his theory of evolution. What he based it on a very small bird, the little finch there. And he said, well, okay, we've got these different islands with slightly different vegetation. The finches don't move between them. And he noted that these finches all had different beaks on different islands, depending on the vegetation. So he said, yeah, obviously there's been an evolutionary process of natural selection. And that's where he got the idea from. And when you go to the center of these islands, there are these enormous volcanoes. This volcano on Isabella Island is 10 kilometers in diameter. That's the caldera of the volcano. It's the second biggest one in the world. There's one in Africa. They thought they were the biggest for a while. And the volcanologists work out when the next eruption is by just looking at the surface of the old eruption. And they just measure how much it rises every year. And when it starts to accelerate, they know that there's going to be another eruption. So there we are. But, on these islands, they're controlled by the sort of South American bureaucracy with the Navy in charge, who get you, that's the only downside, really. You have to fill in about umpteen forms for everything, and it drives you mad. And when there was actually a fire on one of the boats on the anchorage, the Navy came round asking the yachts if they got any fire extinguishers. So we gave them our 1 kilogram fire extinguisher, and shows how disorganized they were. Now from there you go across the Pacific. It's about a 3,500 mile passage across to French Polynesia. So you just chill out, really, get used to the routine. Once you get through the doldrums, you're in the trade winds. I had my 60th birthday on the way, and I got a present of an extra bar of chocolate from the first mate. It was very kind. But we had great fun. But as you can see, when we finally arrived in Hivareux in French Polynesia, you see there was a lot of muck on the bottom of the boat. A few things had bust, but out there's no one who can do anything for you. But what you do is you share your supplies and your equipment with other yachties, and you all work out what you're going to do about damage, and it's very educational. So French Polynesia is an interesting place. It is part of metropolitan France, because under European Union rules, you're not allowed to have an empire anymore. The French used to be very naughty. They used to blow up nuclear things, on a regular basis there. But now it's a very benign regime. Lots of French people retire there. In fact, there was quite a few French surgeons out there who just seemed to have married local girls and decided they weren't going any further. So, when you get fed up around here, there's always an alternative. And the islands are very beautiful. And interestingly, across the Pacific, they've adopted Christianity with real enthusiasm. They're much more enthusiastic. Everybody belongs to a member of the church. And the reason is they had a previous religion, which was based on these things. These are called tikis. And basically, if you're a man with a lot of personality or a big shot, you get a tiki made of you, and you're a big guy. But if you were at the bottom end of the tree, what they would do is they'd arrange, the only time you get into the religious area, the marae, was when you were a human sacrifice. So they really had a grip on the population. So when the locals heard about Christianity, which was relatively democratic, they thought it was a really good idea. So they're very enthusiastic about it. And of course, you know, you meet the locals, and this young girl was very privileged to meet Mr. Morea, you know, Colin. There we are. And in Tahiti, this is Autonomy Day, where they've got relative autonomy, and the French are now providing a very benign presence. The schools and the hospitals are better supplied than in Europe. The infrastructure is fantastic, and every so often they talk about independence, and they decide, no, there's too much money coming in. And you also get instructions. I don't know how this works, John. How do I get it to? Yeah, I'm trying there. Can't get the mouse to.
You managed to take a vote.
Let's go. Let's get back. Oh, yeah, that one. Oh, okay. Not very full. Yeah. Yeah. So you got the general idea. So I was able to email the wife and tell her we were having a terribly hard time and everything was really tough. And then you go out to the Leeward Islands, and Colin here got instructions from some 5- and 7-year-old boys about how to leap off a bridge. You know, apparently you turn your toes down and you make sure nothing's sticking out, and then you're fine. And we also went past some Pacific atolls where John was with us at the time. When we went to these Pacific atolls are they're like the old top of a volcano. And very low lying, and they'll be eventually submerged by global warming. And just one family lived on this particular, but they had an old JCB, and we were able to pull the boat out and do the anti-fouling and change the anodes, and then we had dinner with the family afterwards. They were really nice people. So they run a little carronage, and they bought the week we were there, they bought their little granddaughter from the mainland just to see the island for the first time. And there she is underneath an oilie. And just on the way from these islands, we had one or two storms on the way to the Cook Islands. And it sometimes gets a bit like this. What we do, you've got the self-steering which works, and you can shut the hatch, and you only have to go out there a few times just to make sure everything's okay. So you go down below and have a cup of tea and just let it go, get on with it. But that was about 35 knots of wind. And it got up to about 45 to 50 in the night. It was quite unpleasant. And we got into Rarotonga in the Cook Islands. And interestingly, we didn't know about this until we got there, but there had been a Halberg Rassie with a crew of 2 on board who'd lost their mast in the same storm. They'd taken to the life raft, which was probably unwise, and got picked up by the freighter, and their boat got salvaged 3 days later. They just found it in the sea, and it was picked up and brought into the harbour. But if you're in a boat where the mast has come down, it's a terrible noise, and you can't think straight, really, and that's what happened to them. And here we are, arrived in the Cook Islands, where the locals, they go around in these big canoes called whackers, and they have Polynesians that have been migrating across the Pacific for generations. And they have a traditional method of navigation. They don't have compasses, no GPS, nothing like that. They just use the sun, the position of the sun regarding the boat, to the winds, to the migration of the birds, to what they think the currents are. And it's a very old art. And this boat was going right the way across the Pacific, using that method of navigation. They had another boat to check it, but it was, really, they hadn't had to have a correction yet. So fantastic. And one of the things you do in the Cook Islands is to go to church. We mentioned Christianity, and this is how it works in when you get there. Play, isn't it, John? So you get the general picture. There's a bit more enthusiasm to it than there is down our neck of the woods. So they invited us around for a cup of tea afterwards. They were really hospitable, lovely people. And then you get across to a place called Niue, which is between there and Tonga. It's an island in the middle of nowhere. It's got a population of 2,000, which means that they can go to the Commonwealth Games, and just about everybody in the island can be represented in some sport. So they always get knocked out in the first round, but they all get in. And the swell from the Pacific comes straight in. So when you come in your dinghy, you have to have it craned straight out. And while we were there was a German yacht that was about 35 miles out and had lost her rudder. And they've got a great sailing club with no sailors in it. So they asked us, would we go and help rescue them? So we went off and picked this guy up on a tow rope, and it was great because we got back at the end of it, and we met the chief of police and the prime minister. We got free membership of the yacht club and a complimentary tour of the island, and it was all coordinated from Wellington and New Zealand. So that was all very pleasant. It was an easy rescue because conditions were okay. And then you go across to the Tongan Islands, which are very traditional. There's a king there. People are fairly poor, but you go to the islands, and wherever you go, you share a bit of petrol with them or a bit of your supplies, and they immediately kill a pig and have a meal with you. So that's all great fun. And then finally, you go to Fiji, where everything's controlled by the local chiefs. So what you have to do is, when you arrive, you produce this root called kava. And you have to take some ashore, and you introduce yourself to the headman, who then takes you to see the chief. And you have to sit there cross-legged, eyes down, and the headman tells you, well, these guys come from far seas, they're sailing and all the rest of it. And the chief looks at you, and he decides if he likes the look of you, and if he does, he just claps his hands and says bulla. At which point you have to drink this drink called kava, which is revolting. It's like very bad tea. So you express great appreciation of this fantastic drink, and then from that moment on, you're a member of the village. So you can go into anybody's house, see round, and we expressed an interest in some coconut juice, and this fellow just said, right, okay, I'll get some, and off he goes. Just climbed up a tree, 70-foot tree, no problem, and I've got some coconuts down. Extraordinary. He could be there quite relaxed, all the way up a tree. So the Fijians are absolutely wonderful people. They're very good rugby players. They're great in a fight, but if you want them to do any work, it's almost impossible because they don't see the point. They just think, well, we got enough fruit, we got enough land, forget it. So they got a lot. So the British got a load of Indians in there, and that's caused a bit of friction, really, because the Indians are very hard-working, control all the businesses, and the Fijians just sit around on the land. And you can imagine that occasionally there's a bit of friction. Now, eventually we went from Fiji to New Zealand, and again we had quite a bad storm. Our engine got knocked out. And we had a problem with the water pump. The bearings went, and we looked at the bearings, and they were the wrong. The spare ones I had were the wrong ones. So we managed to rummage around and find some more. There was a bit of play in it, but eventually we got the whole thing working, and it was leaking. So we left on the way to New Zealand. We were about 20 miles off, and it was fairly calm, but we didn't dare to use the engine. We thought we'd just use it right at the end, just to get us in, because the tides would pull you onto the rocks. But it held out in the end, and Mike there thought we'd done a reasonable job getting the. He was the fellow who looked at it eventually, getting everything to work with a load of crap bearings. So when we got to New Zealand, the wife said time was up and had to come home, and that was that. So we had a nice tour around New Zealand, and if any of you are thinking of doing this after you retire, I can thoroughly recommend it. You don't have to be an expert at anything. You just learn as you go along. So that's it. Thank you very much.